Welcome to the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast, where my guests share their stories of addiction, how they recovered, and the tools and practices they use to stay sober now. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, I was just telling you, I don't know where all the ladies are at, but I've had a string of male interviews. And so I was so happy that I have an author, a lady who's going to share her stories. So this is going to be great. We're going to talk about your book, Drunk Love. Do I have that right?
That's right, a marriage under the influence.
A
Yeah,
marriage under the influence. Gosh,
yeah,
I would argue that most people not in recovery have a marriage under the influence.
right. Well, and it's kind of got a double meaning because it's my marriage under the influence of my alcoholism, and then it was my marriage under the influence of my sobriety, and that's a whole other
Oh,
story. So yeah, it's kind of
yeah.
it means two things.
It means two things. How long have you been sober now?
I will be 15 years September the 12th. No frontsies, so I'm 14 years and some change.
Do you know what's so funny? As I recently had a sobriety milestone, and it was 31, so it was a significant one. And but I was kind of saying, talking about it, saying, "Oh, I have an anniversary coming up," and people are messaging me, "No fronts."
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. I feel pretty confident after 31 years.
Yeah, you're
After
not
30.
You're not planning to relapse anytime soon, hopefully.
No, no, no,
Yeah,
ma'am.
yeah.
But congratulations on almost 15 years.
Mhm.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
But before we jump into sort of how we got here, I like to play this little game called the lightning round, which is always very slow. No, no pressure at all. But I do
Good.
like to front load the episode with some resources, books and practices,
Sure.
practical things. So, when you first got sober, were there
Mhm.
any books that really helped you in the beginning?
Well, I started reading recovery memoirs by female alcoholics while I was still drinking, kind of like comparing, is she as bad as me or am I better? That kind of thing. But I think some of the major books that really, are on my bookshelf was, of course, Mary Carr's Lit.
Oh
I,
yeah.
I love Mary Carr. She's my favorite memoirist. I loved Carolyn Knapp, Drinking a Love Story.
Hmm.
I've read all these more than once, before sobriety and after sobriety. I love a
Yeah.
book called We Are the Luckiest.
Oh
And
yeah.
I can't remember her name. I'm
Laura
sorry.
McCowan.
Yeah, I love it. So, Sarah Hepela's Blackout, drinking, remembering the things I drank to forget. I'm very drawn to female recovered alcoholic memoirs, and
Yeah.
yeah, I love them. Yeah.
Yeah, those are good. It's interesting. I'm just so curious. Yeah, so you read them before you quit drinking and then after you quit drinking. What was the difference in your experience between those two?
It's so funny, Arlena, because when I was still drinking, I would read them, like I say, trying to convince myself I wasn't as bad as the author. I didn't have
Yeah.
blackouts all the time or whatever. And it was always kind of reading with one eye shut, not wanting to see, those similarities. And then
Yeah.
after I got sober and reread these books, it's like every line made sense to me. I had turned that corner around my denial, and it just was a much more richer experience because I could see the commonalities between these
Yeah.
women, even though our stories may have been a little bit different. And I can
Yeah.
talk about that at some point, but I still, once again, every line went straight to my heart. And so it was very interesting to see the before and the after in my experience.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, I don't think I've ever talked to anybody who really shared that experience of reading memoirs before and after.
Yeah.
So,
It's very
yeah, I mean,
eye-opening.
yeah, and I really just, man, my heart goes out to you. It's like, please don't let this be me. Please don't let this be me. And then it's like, God damn it, it's me.
Exactly. It's like, oh, it does sound familiar, but I didn't quite do that. I never woke
Yeah.
up in the bed of a stranger, but I woke up hungover plenty of times in my marital bed, not quite
Yeah.
remembering the night before. So
Yeah.
that's what we do when we're in denial. We try to, convince ourselves we don't have this disease. And it's
Yeah.
like a kind of purgatory. And when I
Oh,
finally, did step one fully, it was like, why was I fighting it all this time? I've got this amazing life now because of my sobriety. And it's ironic that I went to such lengths to deny it, and
yeah.
now
I
it's been
mean,
the
listen,
greatest gift. Yeah.
it is. Yeah. And listen, I relate, man. I didn't want that to be the solution either.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that to be the solution. Abstinence
No,
does not sound fun to me.
it does not. It's like how do you live your life? How do you ever go out and have Mexican food and not drink margaritas or get trashed on champagne at a wedding? You know, how can life be fun?
Yeah.
And how can you have pleasure? And, again, the irony is I have more pleasure now, but it's the kind
Yeah.
of, kind of pleasure that's a natural high, not that fake euphoria that drugs and alcohol give us. It's
Well,
got
and it's one that doesn't have a price tag.
exactly. No price tag. And again, and I know you hear this a lot in the rooms, not just not wanting to drink, but my life in every category got better. Again, I fought this for the last 5 years of my drinking. I did not want to go to AA. It terrified me, the idea of giving up alcohol. I was a nightly wine drinker and I just couldn't
Yeah.
see any other way to live.
Yeah.
And, when it finally happened, when my husband left me and I finally went to rehab, that was the start of my real life and our real marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that because I feel like that is the fear that everybody goes through. It's like, I'm never going to have any fun again. And once you finally surrender to it and give it up, it's like a whole new world opens up.
It's a whole new world. And, we lost some friends, like a lot of drinkers. We hung out with people that drank a lot.
Ah, yeah.
I can't say if they were alcoholics or not, but there was this one couple and we did everything together, Christmas,
Mm.
traveling. And when I
Oh,
finally got sober, that was like they were out of our lives. They didn't want to have anything to do with me. And it hurt my feelings in the beginning
wow.
till
Yeah.
my sponsor said, you're not drinking makes them uncomfortable. It has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
And we still have friends that drink, but they're like normal drinkers
Hmm.
and they're happy to be with me. I'm a lot more
Yeah.
fun and I don't pass out at 9 o'clock every night.
Party till 9. Woohoo.
Woohoo! That's life, right? Live it up.
My goodness.
I
Let
know.
me tell you, it'll save your face from aging, this whole
Yes.
sobriety thing.
Yeah. Oh, I look so much better. My
Oh
mother
yeah.
told me after I got sober, she said, you had gotten so brittle. You were brittle. And now you've come
Mm.
back to life. And, I'm healthier, skin's better. I mean, everything, your life
Yeah.
changes in so many ways. And we think it's just stopping drinking.
Yeah.
And it's, my career was rejuvenated. I was able to work, another 10 years sober. My
Wow.
relationship with my husband and my son. I mean, it all kind of came back to life. And that's because of the program and the fact that
Yeah.
I was finally able to cross that line and go ahead and do step one.
Yeah.
The
That's
most important
amazing.
step. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for no lie.
That's
Oh my
right.
goodness.
Mhm.
So over the 15 years, have you noticed like a reoccurring theme or do you have a mantra or a quote that you kind of live by?
Well, I love my favorite line from the big book is release me from the bondage of self from the third step
Yes.
prayer. I mean, that just says it all in a nutshell, right? Our biggest problem is ourselves and what happens right in here, and the more I've been able to work that step and to, get out of my own head by helping other women mostly and, being in the middle of the herd, um, that tyranny of the self and that selfishness and self-centeredness. I'm not saying I'm totally selfless or free from fear, but man, the thermostat's been turned way down. I lived my whole life, starting as a kid, full of fear and panic and not, worried about not being good enough.
Mhm.
And it was all very self-centered. And I think
Yeah.
by refocusing and trying to get out of my own head and help somebody else, it's just done wonders with my, general happiness. I love the quote too from Eleanor Roosevelt, you wouldn't worry so much what other people think of you if you realized how seldomly they do.
Don't
The
you
idea
love
that we're
that?
not the
Yeah.
center of the universe, right?
Yeah.
We're one among many, and that just it kind of reorients your thinking, and that's
Yeah.
turned down the fear thermostat in my life. I don't have panic attacks anymore.
Oh my goodness.
It's been revolutionary for me to go
Yeah.
through the steps and do the work around the whole, self bondage.
Yeah.
And I have, I love Richard Rohr. I read a lot of his
Hmm.
books, Breathing Underwater. I'm working on a book right now with a sponsee about spirituality and the 12 steps.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I'm a big reader. So I
Yeah.
do a lot of reading and yeah, that's how I've kind of found my recovery too.
No, I love that. I love that. Do you have a regular self-care practice? Like, do you have like a set of weekly meetings you go to? Do you have like a morning ritual? What does that look like for you?
So I hit 3 meetings a week, and two of them are women's meetings. I have nothing against co-ed meetings, but women's meetings are just my vibe. That's where I
Hmm.
feel kind of the safest. I go to
Yeah.
2 literature-based women's meetings, and then my husband and I go to a speaker meeting every Sunday, which is
Oh, wow.
co-ed, and that's kind of like our church now. That's our spiritual home.
Nice.
And, so I have the serenity prayer right by my bed, and it's the first thing I see in the morning, and it's the last thing I see at night, and that's my regular prayer, is just to, the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
We have a lake close to our house, and I walk around the lake a bunch. That's kind of my happy place. It's where I kind of meditate with nature. I work out a lot. I think a lot of people in recovery do that because we like those good brain chemicals.
We
So I
should.
lift weights and I do a lot of working out and, what else do I do? I have sponsees and my
Yeah.
sponsor that I've had from the beginning, and we still get together on a regular basis. We're kinda like more friends now. We kinda sponsor each other.
Mm,
But, so yeah, prayer, meditation, just all the usual stuff.
yeah.
I feel like the 12 steps, um, I don't need to fix them. They're pretty good just the way they are. I know we call them the 12 suggestions, but I stick pretty close to the big book and the 12 and 12 when I work with other women. But, and that
Mhm.
my husband and I also, we've been for about 5 or 6 years, we were co-directors of something called the Spiritual Retreat and Recovery, and it's a biannual, retreat through the Episcopal Church. They have a real strong, recovery part of their mission field, and we directed that, for about 5 or 6 years, and it's for everybody that's in 12-step, Al-Anon, AA, ACOA, NA, and so retreats are a big that's how I get my tank filled back up. It's going to
Mm.
and I love to go to I'm not going to Vancouver, that's coming up, the international, but we try to go to, a fair number of retreats and things like that because it kinda, I don't know, just sort of tightens the screws on your recovery. So that's what I
Really
do.
is kind of yeah, it's kind of inspiring. I just spoke at a conference not that long ago and
Wow.
brought my husband with me, and he hadn't been going to meetings, and after going to the conference he was like, man, I really kind of miss this. So it was
Yeah.
kind of nice to sort of like get back in the middle, and
Yeah.
I could see how that's very nurturing and
Yeah.
inspiring for sure.
Where did you speak at? What conference was it?
It was the Howell conference
Mhm.
in Oregon.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, Howell stands for honesty, open-mindedness, willing, and then that
Willingness.
L is love.
Oh, I love that.
It was so cute. Yeah,
That's so
it
great.
was,
Good on you.
yeah, it was
That's
a great
a big
group of
deal.
people. Super
Yeah.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I
Um,
noticed too, talking about your husband missing meetings, sometimes I'll start getting lazy and I'll kind of pull back on my meetings every now and then, and I feel that squirreliness start to kind of creep into my brain. Not that I, am gonna drink again, but to keep my head in the right place and that feeling that I get from meetings, I have to go to them. And so
yeah.
that's, it's a cautionary tale when you start pulling back and resting on your laurels that it's like, I want to feel good. I'm an alcoholic. I want to feel good. Meetings make me feel good. Even when I don't want to go, when
Yeah.
I go, always feel better afterwards.
Yeah. It's kind of like going to the gym. It's like nobody ever
It
really wants to go, but when you get done, you're like, woohoo, that was
Yeah.
amazing.
I feel good. It's kinda like my insulin, it keeps my disease in
Yeah.
remission, and I've gotta
Yeah.
take my medicine.
Yeah. That's
I'm
how
still an
I
alcoholic down in my lizard brain.
Yeah, we do sort of have like this default mode.
Yep.
And I do feel like all these practices, the connection, the community, like revisiting
Mhm.
the ideas and the material over and over again is sort of
Yeah.
that's like, if no everybody gets it like I always talk about like if you wouldn't eat one salad and expect to stay and
Yeah.
be healthy forever, you wouldn't go to the gym once. It's like if you go to the gym every day for a year, if you stop going, your body goes back to sort of
Yeah.
factory settings.
It
And
does.
so that's how our thinking is too.
Yeah.
And I think plus we're like bombarded by messages of alcohol all the time. It's in
Everywhere.
movies and
Yeah.
TVs, it's everywhere. Everything is seems like it's centered around alcohol. So we're getting lots of messages that we should drink. So it's important to sort of be clear
Yeah.
that you
Especially,
shouldn't.
talking about women, it's like these days it seems like wine and women are almost synonymous. Everywhere you see women on TV and movies, on Facebook, everybody's drinking wine, and it's like, when did that become sort of the thing that women do? I just don't yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know when that happened. Yeah, the
Yeah,
rosé all day and all the funny little things that you see in like the
yeah,
airport, shops
Yeah.
and stuff, it's always like centered around women and wine. You're right. It's
Well,
kind of
and
drives me crazy.
that drives me crazy too. And it's like, you know, this is a we program. Whether you go through AA or some other kind of treatment modality, our disease is one of disconnection and isolation, and we only
Yeah.
heal in community with other alcoholics. And so it's like, if my factory settings definitely fear, and if I want to stay out of fear,
Mm,
I've got to be with the herd, with the tribe on a regular
yeah.
basis, or I'm gonna go back to that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, connection is the name of the game.
Yeah. Community is so important for
Yeah.
sure. When you look back at when you first got sober, what's one thing you would have told your younger self,
Yeah.
your newly sober self?
It's like, why fight it? It's like alcohol was such a part of your life and you were so afraid to give it up. And again, the huge irony is, what's that saying? When we're alcoholics, we give up everything for one thing. And when we get in
Right.
recovery, we give up one thing for everything.
Yeah.
And that's certainly been true of my life. I wish I could just take myself by the shoulders when age 47 is when my drinking started going off the rails. If I could have just taken myself at that age and say, you don't need to go through the next 5 years. You don't need to hurt your son. You don't need to hurt your husband. Just get with the program. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Quit fighting this. But I stayed sick a lot longer than I needed to. But, you have to
Yeah.
it takes what it takes, right?
Exactly.
Everything I
Yeah.
went through is what got me to where I am right now. So, it's just the way it went, right?
Yeah, and I love that promise that we won't regret the past or we don't wish to shut the door on it. Like your experience will benefit others who felt like, man, I think I drank way too long. If I wish I
Yeah.
would have just, surrendered so much earlier, it would have been so much better. But
Right. Right. Yeah, definitely. It's
you're
so true.
uniquely
Yeah.
qualified to help somebody else.
Well, and it's the pain that we go through is how we connect, right? If I
Yeah,
hadn't gone through the pain of those last 5 years of my drinking, I wouldn't have that commonality to be able to sit across from another woman and say, look, I know what you're going through. I went through something kind of like that. That's
yeah,
how we connect. It's the pain that
yeah, really.
transforms, if
It's
it's
sort of
not
like
transformed. Mhm.
It's sort of like trauma bonds are used when there's like an abusive relationship. But I feel like in 12 step, we do kind of trauma bond in the sense of like when you are brave enough to share your vulnerability
Mhm.
and it's met with kindness and compassion and it kind of opens the door for the other person to share their pain. It's like then we become so connected and bonded. It's like we understand each other in ways that, I would hate to say normal people, but other people who haven't had that experience. I know nobody's normal.
Normies,
Yeah, there's no such thing as normal. It's
right?
funny little misnomer we like to call them. But,
Yeah.
it's so important for us to connect with other people who've had a similar experience. It just makes us feel like we find a new normal.
We do. That's totally what it is. It's not
Yeah.
drinking becomes the new normal, and
Yeah.
yeah, and it's if we didn't have that pain, and it's what I love about 12 step, and I guess we could say AA here. I don't know if you
It's
have
up
an
to you. Yeah, it
I
is.
in my book I just call it the program or the
Mhm.
fellowship. But it's like that's, there's no judgment. It's a safe space. And I love, I don't go to a lot of co-ed meetings, but one of the things I love about AA is men coming out and being vulnerable and talking about their struggles with other men in public. I mean, where else do you have that in this society?
I
It's
know.
just it's no judgments, it's safety. And for a lot of people, including me, when I finally got sober in 2010, it's like I finally felt like I was home. I was somewhere where I don't have to always feel like an outsider or have to
Yeah.
explain myself. Everybody gets what we go through,
Yeah.
and that's our
Yeah.
connection. Yeah.
It really is. No,
It's
I
a
love that.
miracle. It
It
is.
really is. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I want to recognize that there are some challenges,
Mhm.
but there is a safe way to go through. It's important to like when people are sharing at meetings that they share in a general way. We don't have to give out specifics
Right.
and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah. Some stuff is just for your sponsor or your therapist. And I had to kind of learn that early on that, there's some things you
Yeah.
share in a meeting, some things you share with your sponsor or your therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That really reinforces the idea of
Yeah.
safety. Yeah,
Definitely. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, listen, let's talk a little bit about how we got here. I'm always so curious about, I feel like what happens in childhood sets the stage for what's to come. What was your family of origin like when you were growing up?
So that's so interesting. There's this concept now of adverse childhood events,
Oh,
which
the
can be
ACE, there's an,
the ACE
yeah,
score.
the ACE score. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
free
which is
quiz
pretty,
that you can take online.
mine's pretty high. And the more points you have, the higher the chance is of you developing an addiction later in life, or chronic health issues too. So
Yeah, yeah.
for me, my parents divorced when I was 6, and I didn't see my father until my 20s. I didn't hear from him, talk to him. By then he
He
was
just disappeared?
just disappeared. Even though he worked like 2 streets over from where we lived, he was gone. He was physically abusive with my mother, and I was
Oh,
young, but I remember seeing some of that, like him punching her out, and then,
oh,
and so witnessing domestic violence is one of those A score
okay.
notches. And then when I was around 20, my older sister, who was an artist like my father, met him, and I met with him in a series of topless bars and dive joints, maybe a handful of times, till I realized I didn't want him in my life. He was really a pretty messed up person.
Yeah.
But he left when I was 6, and so my mother raised 3 girls all by herself. And she was a very good mother in some ways, but she had her own anger issues. And there were beatings with a belt on the bare ass, over the bathtub. and
Oh, yeah.
and so there was some trauma there too, even though, again, she's the one who stayed. She raised us up. She worked really hard, but I was afraid of her a lot. She had a trigger temper. And so there was kind of a double whammy. I kind of got the alcoholic genes from my estranged father, and then this mother that, caused a good bit of anxiety in me. I didn't have the worst childhood by any stretch, but, by the time I had my first panic attack in elementary school. And then all through my teens and 20s, I struggled with panic attacks, which, is anxiety when your heart
Yeah.
starts pounding and you can't breathe and you don't know what's going on. I thought I was losing my mind till I found out that, a panic attack's not going to kill me. I think I was reading a magazine in the dentist's office when I was, in my 20s. But certainly all this primed the pump for me to want to change how I felt. My first drunk in middle school, I was like, all those tight coils in my body just relaxed. You hear in meetings like that feeling, like
Yeah.
this is how I'm supposed to feel. And I certainly had that, that reaction to alcohol. But I drank. I could
How
talk
old were
about
you
it.
the first time you drank?
I think it was in middle school. But then by high school, I was drinking and doing other drugs, but it wasn't like out of control. I mean, I hung out with the bad kids. We
Mm.
would steal wine from, Boone's Farm, and, real typical story. I was drawn to substances, very early on because it made me let me get out of myself, right?
What kind of other substances were you using?
Oh, marijuana, cocaine. There was a time in my high school period with my best friends, we would inject crystal meth,
Oh, wow.
snorting it. Yeah, I did some pretty bad, crazy stuff, but, alcohol was always my first love.
Hmm.
That's the one that really hit the sweet spot. But so I was able to graduate high school. I never, you hear of people in the rooms that the minute they start drinking, they're having those consequences, blackouts, DUIs, drinking in the morning, losing jobs, quitting school. I was able to graduate high school, graduate college. By my junior year of college, I had to drink something every night, even if it was just a tall boy beer from the convenience store, or else I just didn't feel right. But I graduated college. I got a master's degree. I drank for decades, more than a woman should drink, but I didn't have any of the serious consequences. It was all good fun. I got married, I had a child, I built a successful career in newspaper journalism, and it was all great fun. I met my husband on a blind date, and he loved to drink too. He's from New Orleans, and he did drugs. So that was a big part of our relationship from the very get-go. It's how we had fun. It was how we had intimacy. And like I said, I enjoyed my drinking. I drank more than a woman should drink. We would kill a liter bottle of wine every night, he and I. But then over time, I would drink more and more. And then when I turned 47, Arlena, it was like this flip just switched overnight. And
Were
I
you
started.
in were you, had you hit menopause yet or perimenopause or?
I went through menopause early, like at
Oh,
42.
okay. Oh, okay. So
All
you were
the
sort of past all that.
Yeah, yeah. All the women in my family are all early menopausers. I'm not sure why, but
Because I only ask that because it seems like, all your hormones change and like everything changes about how you process everything. So I would imagine it would affect how you process alcohol as well.
Well, and it also menopause did a number on me with my sleep, and I developed chronic
Oh.
insomnia back in 2000, which that's a big part of my story too, and I can go into that. But um, I drank, and always went to work. I never got a DUI. My husband always drove. That may have been why, but it's like it's like when I turned 47 again, that line we talk about in AA, I crossed that line and I changed from a cucumber into a pickle. But again, even then, only my husband and my son saw it. I'd start slurring and, getting loud and stumbly. And I called them my incidents, right? I would have a bad night and, my husband and son would be upset with me. So I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit. I'd go to AA and, I'd kind of do that for a while, but then I would convince myself, how could I be an alcoholic? I never, again, I've never had all those bad things happen to me. It's just my husband's just, he's my drinking buddy, and now he's getting mad because I'm not handling my alcohol anymore.
Mm.
And so I would take to hiding drinks, like, putting the little bottles of wine in the closet because he was watching me those last 5 years.
Oh, wow.
He would do this weird thing. This is how he enabled me. I would get drunk and slur in front of my son, and he'll be upset. My husband would be upset. And then a week would pass, he'd want to drink with me again on the deck. So it was this real confusing message I was getting from him that don't drink, drink. And so, of course, as an alcoholic, that was great. We can drink again. And my son, who I guess was probably late middle school or high school about this time, he, at one point, one of the first times early on, I got really drunk at a party and he saw me stumbling and falling around the front yard. And next day I was, I'm going to quit. I'm going to go to AA. And I would do that. And then, I would talk myself out of being an alcoholic. And I would tell myself, I'm going to drink, but I'll be okay. I'm not going to drink too much. And, after you tell a child that a couple of times, they stop trusting you. It's,
Yeah.
it's like the
Yeah.
shade went down in his eyes and he's like, whatever, mom. I mean, one time he burst out crying, begging me to quit drinking. And
Oh,
that wasn't enough. I say that maternal love is maybe the strongest force in the world. Addiction can be stronger.
100%.
I told myself I was a great mom. I wasn't going to beat my child with a belt. I was going to be super mom. And here I was causing him the greatest pain in his young life because I just couldn't stop.
Yeah.
And I would go along. Sometimes I'd go for a month. Sometimes I'd go for 3 months and not have an incident. But as the time went by, as I got closer and closer to age 52, it's a progressive disease, right? It always gets worse. It never gets better. And these incidents started happening closer and closer together. And the fateful night was, I guess it was 2 days before my sobriety date. My son was already gone by now. My husband and I went to see a show at the Majestic Theater. We went to see Jersey Boys. And I was drinking, before dinner, at the theater, and I had my first major blackout, which, I had had brownouts before, like couldn't quite remember saying goodbye to people at the dinner party, but never like a loss of time. And I had always told myself, if I ever have like a blackout, that's my sign that I need to quit drinking. But, you know, the next day, my husband said, I can't do this anymore. I cannot handle your drinking anymore. He'd been living this reality for 5 years, and he packed a suitcase and he left.
Wow.
And, what was the worst night of my life, in retrospect, was the best night of my life because
Yeah.
I ended up going to see this therapist that I had seen 6 months prior that I had lied to about how much I was drinking. You know how we do with therapists, right?
Yes.
We don't tell the truth. I went back to see her, and by that point, I guess I had the gift of desperation. My husband had left me, and I kind of knew the jig was up. And she told me, her name was Joan. She's an amazing therapist. She's like, "You're a chronic relapser. You need to go to rehab." And I'm like, "How can I go to rehab? My bosses have no idea I have a drinking problem. My friends don't really know." I was one of those kind of at-home closet drinkers, which I think a lot of women alcoholics are that way. We kind of maintain out in the world, and
Hmm.
only our family really sees our disease. But I was scared enough that I took her advice and I met with this woman. She'd said, "You're going to meet this woman tonight. Her name is Kathy. She's going to be your sponsor." So I got my sponsor through my therapist.
Wow.
And I met her that night at Club 12, which is kind of the headquarters for meetings in San Antonio. And I sat down across from her and I again vomited out everything, the hiding the drinks, the lying about how much I was drinking. It's always, I only had two, right? And then you go and you chug some vodka. And she's like, yeah, I agree. You need to go to rehab. And I was like, I can't do that. We're having a party for my son, a college graduation party. I've got to be there for him. She said, your son wants you to get sober. And for some reason, I don't know why, there was this light coming out of her eyes. It's like a door in my heart just opened. And for once, I was willing to listen. And I asked her, I said, Kathy, are you sure that I can have a fun life without alcohol? I mean, I can't imagine that. She just went, and
She just nodded.
yeah, I don't know what it was that night. It was like this otherworldly light coming out of her eyes, but it convinced me. And a day or so later, I told my boss, I'm going to go to rehab. I called him and he's like, "You're doing what?"
He was surprised.
Very much so.
Wow.
And I tell you that I was so full of shame and I was embarrassed that, I'd be gone for 30 days. People at work would notice, what
Yeah.
am I going to do? And, but I knew the jig was up. Somehow I finally realized that my life was going to change. I was going to lose everything. I was going to lose my husband. I'd already kind of lost my son. He didn't trust me
Yeah.
anymore. So that, yeah, 2010, I went to a place called Starlight in the
Mm.
Texas Hill Country, and that's some things happened there that were, I guess, burning bush experiences. I
Oh,
was
like what?
well, I was back up a little bit. The night of the Majestic, I had just started taking a new antidepressant for my insomnia. I tried all kind of medication, Ambien, everything. And when I got to rehab, I started telling myself, well, it was this new medication that caused me to black out. It wasn't the 8 drinks I had at the theater. It's this
To be
medication.
fair, eight doesn't sound like a lot.
Well, for me, that was a lot. And, that was the other thing that I would go to meetings and I'd hear people talking about drinking a 12 pack, a night or a handle, fifth of vodka. And my quantities wasn't that high. But
Okay.
I think that again, it was my tolerance was changing and I was getting
Yeah.
drunker quicker. And
Yeah.
so, you know, to jump ahead a little bit about quantities, I went to the doctor after I got out of rehab because they say, go get a full bill of health.
Right.
And I went and I hadn't had a drink in like 2 months. And my liver enzymes came back through the roof. And I asked the doctor, you know, am I in danger of having cirrhosis? And he said, you may have some of that already going on. Arlena, you could have pushed me off the chair. I had no idea that, I would drink, a bottle of wine and maybe some extra, and I would get drunk. But women's bodies are so much more impacted by alcohol that my quantities, even though they were lower than what you typically hear in the rooms, it was enough to cause some serious damage. My liver got better, thank God. But
Yeah.
wow, I had no idea I was causing that kind of damage to my body. I'd be dead now, I think, if I hadn't gotten sober.
Yeah. The denial is strong. Like
Yeah,
I talk to people who are drinking, 12, 18 drinks a week that are
yeah.
trying to cut back. And I'm like, this is not good. This is like the Center for Disease Control considers that to be heavy drinking.
Mhm.
That is not
Well,
good.
and now they're coming out with all the science showing that even moderate drinking poses
Yeah,
risk for cancer, and
there's
yeah,
no recommended amount of alcohol. So
no,
it's
there's no,
literally poison for your body.
it's a neurotoxin.
It
It's not a
is.
food.
Yeah. Yeah, it's poison.
But back to the burning bush, I
Yes.
went to rehab and I was telling myself those first weeks, it wasn't the alcohol, it was the pill that made me have a blackout. And my burning bush story sounds kind of squirrely, but I went to see the doctor trying to get him to tell me that it was this pill that I was taking that caused the blackout, not the drinks I had. And he was like, what were you taking? And I told him it was Elavil. How much? Well, 30 milligrams. He's like, no, by the next night, it would have been out of your system. That wasn't what caused your blackout. And it was like this experience. I left the doctor's office and I was like walking down the hall to find my rehab buddy to tell her what happened. But it's like colors were brighter. I had figured out finally that I caused that blackout. Blackout means alcoholic. I have to stop drinking. And it was like one of those psychic turnarounds. It all became clear to me finally. I couldn't blame it on anything else but my drinking. And some other things happened. My husband had been he had his own spiritual experience years earlier. My husband does go to Al-Anon, and he'd been praying over these spiritual books that he had and then mailing them to me in rehab. And I always made fun of him and his all his, spiritual stuff because I was very much an unbeliever before all this happened. But I was reading these books he was sending me, and it was like every sentence was written just for me. And so a
Wow.
couple other things happened like that. I call them my divine coincidences. That was somebody or something was leading me down a path to sobriety, and I didn't know what it was. I had this prayer one night. God, I don't believe in you, but if you exist, you've got to help me. And that's when I went to see the doctor and got the information that I needed to hear about blacking out. And it's like, it was a turning point for me. And if I hadn't gone to rehab, even though I didn't need to go through detox, I never had like withdrawal. If I hadn't gone, I don't know if I would have had those experiences, and I don't know if I would have ever gotten sober.
Yeah. Did you have any kind of spirituality growing up?
Yeah, so my mother raised us all Episcopalian.
Okay.
We went to church every Sunday. We went to potluck dinners, at the church on Wednesday. I had, we had to go to church every Sunday. She was very big on that. But I guess, I don't know, certainly by high school, maybe even earlier, I had given up on God. I thought that it was all a fairy tale and, I had no God of my understanding. And I called myself probably a militant agnostic, for most of
Mm,
that. And I remember telling the therapist, Joan, that was telling me I needed to go to rehab. And I knew enough about AA. I said, I've got a problem with the whole God thing, to be honest with you. And she said, you're going to have to find a way around that. That's all she said. And I was like, mm. But I went there, I went to rehab, and these things felt like spiritual experiences, the things that were
yeah.
happening to me. And I remember when I got out of rehab, maybe it had been a month, 3 weeks, and I was sitting at a stoplight, and it dawned on me that I hadn't thought about opening a bottle of wine for like days. And I was a woman who had to drink wine every night to go to sleep, to get that buzz.
Wow.
And I
Yeah.
started screaming, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I didn't really know who or what I was thanking, but something had changed. That
Yeah.
psychic change was happening where I was neutral about alcohol. And I fought drinking, stopping drinking for 5 years. And like it was sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. The change happened quickly for me. And I'm just so grateful that that's the experience. The promises started coming true pretty quickly. And I don't have, I'm not, I don't, we don't go to church, uh, AA is my spiritual home, but, my concept of God is just light and love. I've got a very
Mm,
big, roomy idea. I don't have a lot of doctrine or dogma, but somebody or something wanted me to be sober, and that force loves me. The force that created the universe wants me to be sober. That still blows my mind, but there's no other way to explain it. I struggled for 5 years. I tried to moderate or stop. And when I finally got down on my knees in rehab and said, you got to help me. I don't believe in you, but you got to help me. Everything changed. And I can't explain that, Arlena. My
yeah.
story, there's no other way to explain it than something big, certainly bigger than me, intervened and changed my life. And, that's the story that I share with sponsees. And, people come to their spirituality all different ways in the program, but I'm so glad that the geniuses that created this back in 1939 uh, didn't tell you got to believe in a certain kind of God or higher power. You just need to find one, that's not
Did
you.
you, did you, you had some awareness about AA. You were like, I don't want to go there. Did you think it was a religious program?
I had heard that. My mother married a second alcoholic. She had a bad picker, and so she had a black belt in Al-Anon, and I always resented that, all the Al-Anon stuff. Um,
Hmm.
but I'm sorry, what did you ask me?
Um, Shoot, I forgot. I'm gonna have to have my editor. It's a couple of middle-aged women
Oh yeah,
trying to
no,
think
I had
straight.
gone in and out of the program those
Oh,
5 years I
religious.
quit
Yeah.
drinking,
Yeah.
and all the God talk really bothered me. It's like it was like fingernails on a chalkboard.
Yeah, me too.
And all I
Yeah.
heard were the differences. I
Yeah.
was like, all these people, they're full of it, right? It's a delusion.
Yeah.
This higher power is a delusion.
Zulu. Yeah.
But you get desperate enough, and you're willing to make accommodations for what's that word, contempt prior to investigation.
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
that big time before
Mm.
I got sober. But you know it's like I got out of rehab, I jumped in the program with both feet, 90 meetings in 90 days. and I started getting results. I started feeling better.
Yeah.
I realized I didn't have to drink, and it's like my little mustard seed of faith grew from that. I had to
Yeah.
experience it before I could actually believe it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing. You talked about having experiences. Like
Mhm.
you can hope. I love the acronym for hope, hearing other people's experiences.
Yes.
But it gives you a little hope, but until you have your own like earth-shattering experience, like
Mhm.
that's what changes us is when we start
Yes.
having our own experiences. But we don't have those experiences until we open ourselves up to new information and then
Mhm.
start taking different actions. Like the
Yeah.
whole, like I was pretty allergic to religion. But when 31 years ago, there was nothing else. Like
Mhm.
there's all these other programs now, but back then
Yeah.
there was nothing else. And I was like, oh my gosh, if this is the God thing, I'm not going to be able to do it. And I
Yeah.
had this gal, she was like, oh, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. So she had me take a piece of paper and then on one side write all the things I would want God to be. And then on the
Mhm.
other side, all the things that I didn't want God to be. And when I was done, she said, let me see your paper. So I handed her, she ripped it in half.
Oh.
And she handed me the good side and she's like, let's just start with this. And I was
Oh,
like, that's it. She's like, that's it.
that's it. That's all you
No,
got to
no
do.
Bible verses to remember, no dogma, no nothing. Just
Right.
God is love. That's all I
Yeah.
pretty much could handle.
God, I think of my higher power as an unconditionally loving parent, the one that I never
Yeah.
really had, but
Yeah.
I'm going to use that. That's a great idea.
Isn't that
That's a great
great? I
way to
loved
do it.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
definitely.
was really lucky. I got somebody really good. But anyway, that was exactly what I needed because I was like, uh-oh, I'm
Yeah.
not going to be able to do this.
Well, and I know there are people that are, remain atheist or agnostics in the program, and
Yeah.
then they just use the fellowship as their higher power. So
Yeah.
it's a group of drunks or good orderly direction. And it's like, I'm not one of those people that you have to do it this way or it's the highway.
No,
Whatever works for
no.
you, even
Exactly.
if it's something else like rational recovery or, like you say,
Smart or
yeah, or if
she
you're gonna, do
recovered,
psilocybin trips twice a year with a therapist and that keeps you sober, or now they're saying Ozempic might,
whatever.
whatever makes you stop hurting your children or killing people with your car, do it.
Yeah. Or hurting yourself.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
living this small, cramped life that fits into a bottle, that's no way to live. It's really not.
No, and I wonder if you look back at your, old self that felt the need to do that. I wonder if you look back on her with compassion. Like we really didn't have another way.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah, it's like
all.
you want to hug her because it's like she was just so afraid.
So afraid.
It had
Yeah.
become such a crutch. My life really
Yeah.
had, even though I was still working, I was just kind of phoning it in. I never got
Yeah.
fired, but I was not working. My life had drilled down to how much can I drink tonight? How much can I sneak? How much does my husband want to get drunk? Can we get drunk? And it's like,
That's
she just didn't know
exhausting.
that. Yeah, it's like, she didn't know I was doing what had worked for me for years and years, and then it stopped
Yeah.
working. But I just, if I could just put something in a bottle and give it to sponsees and say, "Look, your life's going to be okay. It's going to get better. Just take that leap." But you feel like you're jumping off a cliff and there's no parachute.
It does feel like an abyss. And I
It
remember,
does.
standing at the abyss and being like, still not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
some of us come to the point where we're just like, okay, I'm going to give this thing a chance. And
Yeah.
thank God that you did. So that was
Yeah.
15 years ago. And what changes did you experience in your relationship? I would imagine you're
Yeah.
doing steps with
Mhm.
your sponsor. I bet the four step was pretty eye-opening, no?
Yes. Well, and I had done a number of them, but talking about relationships, like I said, my husband was my favorite drinking buddy. It was part
Yeah.
of our relationship. And we had this idea that, once I went to rehab and stopped drinking, all the problems in our marriage would like magically disappear overnight.
Rats.
And what we found out, and it wasn't so much, my husband actually early on, he said, I guess I wanted you to get sober, but I wanted you just to drink the way you used to. And it's like,
Yeah.
he had a sober wife and he didn't know what to do with me. And we had all
Yeah.
these dynamics in our marriage. For so long, I was the poor little shame-ridden drunk wife, and he was the scolding, untreated Al-Anon. I started getting stronger in my recovery day by day. I was like building a backbone. And so the dynamics in our relationship changed and he just
hmm
flipped out. When I was 6 months sober, he's like, I think I'm going to separate again. He just couldn't, he had so much anger and resentment that,
Yeah.
I didn't get sober until he finally left me. And, we had dynamics that even predated my alcoholism that we had in our marriage. He had a traumatic family of origin too. So we had to sit down, that first year of my sobriety, and, because he was in and out of Al-Anon too, just like I was in and out of AA. We had sort of mirror journey that, and we went to this therapist for a full year, Joan, and we did, individual and marriage
Couple.
therapy together. And we had to find a whole new way to be. And it was touch and go there for a while.
Wow.
In the beginning, he wasn't going to drink. And then when I was about 6 months sober, he's like, well, I think I should be able to drink because I'm not an alcoholic. And he wasn't. He was never an alcoholic. And talk about resentment. I had a big one there. And I had to have my sponsor tell me, look, Melissa, your sobriety is between you and your higher power. It's not between you and your husband. You just let him
Yeah.
do what he's going to do. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it was still a rocky road that first year, but I have to say now, our marriage it's more than I ever could have imagined. I mean, it's a human marriage, but
Yeah.
you know,
I have a question for you because you know, this has come up in my circle and over the years of when you're the drinker, you get sober and your spouse is pissed and they keep bringing it up. And it's like, how did y'all work that out? Like,
again,
how long did it end? Did you have to go to therapy to sort of resolve that? There come a
yeah,
time when he stopped throwing it in your face and
yeah. Well, and what he threw in my face was, you're spending too much time in AA.
no,
We often hear that people, they get jealous and resentful. They want us to
yeah,
get sober, but then the stuff we have to do to stay sober, they're like, you're
it's
gone
time
again tonight.
consuming.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's time consuming.
But I think for us, it was, we were both very committed. And, part of the reason I wanted to write this book is because a lot of marriages break up over addiction. Even when the alcoholic gets sober, there's
Yeah,
often too much damage. And I'm not judging anyone that divorces their alcoholic or their addict. I mean, I totally get it.
yeah.
But Mark and I knew from the get-go that we wanted to stay together, even though it was rocky that first year, those first 6 months. But, he was committed to doing the work, and I was, in our respective programs and then with the therapist. And we went to some marriage retreats too. And
Mm.
yeah, it was rocky. And, we still have our moments. I'm not trying to present this perfect marriage, but
Oh, you're human?
yeah, believe it or not. But man, the program gives you so many tools to deal with relationships,
Yeah,
Al-Anon and AA. And so we don't, we used to go for days without speaking, the silent treatment, and not being able to express our feelings. And we've gotten so much better. We have a saying in our house, the person who apologizes first wins, So it's
mm.
really changed our dynamic. And he doesn't, there's beer in the refrigerator right now, but it doesn't call my name. I don't even think about it. And he hardly drinks at all anymore, but that's more because he's old. He can't sleep well if he has more than one drink. So
Yeah,
he hardly drinks at all. And if he was still a heavy drinker, could I still have stayed married to him? I don't think so. I
yeah,
couldn't be around that. But thank God he doesn't want to. So
yeah.
yeah, we're
So
best
it's
friends.
that's beautiful, actually. So just surviving that first year in your marriage sounds like a lot of step work, personal responsibility, therapy, working out resentment, a lot of, I would imagine a lot of validation, a lot of listening, a lot of space for all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely all of that. And it was so eye-opening that we found out we could be together and have fun with me not drinking. That was just sort of
Yeah.
life-changing, that I could be a full, committed person in this partnership, still have a good time, not crashing out on the recliner at 9 o'clock where he'd have to scream at me to get up and go to bed, because I'd be,
Yeah.
drunk and on whatever medication I was taking. And
Yeah.
and we found, and he's found too, that he can have a good time without alcohol. But it's an ongoing thing. We're both human beings married to each other, bringing all the stuff from our, other life into it. But yeah, I mean, we took a trip. I guess maybe I was a year sober. We went to uh, London, and we went to Rome. And it was like,
Nice.
man, not only am I having fun, I can remember all of it, and it's like,
And saving money.
sex got better. I mean, you could have sex without
Yeah.
drinking. Who knew?
It is intense.
It's much, it took a little while to get used to it, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's
the first time
so
might be a
much
little
better.
weird. Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, we don't talk
Oh,
about that too much. It's like it
we
gets way
don't.
better. Yeah, it gets
Yeah,
better. We're so
it's
afraid
better.
it's going to be worse, but it
We're
gets
so
better.
afraid. Yeah.
Yeah, it might be a little weird at first, but
Oh, yeah.
talk
And
about
there's a whole,
intimacy.
I know, there's a whole world out there that, experiencing it sober, is just, I
Yeah,
don't know, it's life changing. It
it's
really
on
is.
a whole nother level. Well,
Yeah.
let me ask you a little bit about the book. Why did you want to write this book?
Well, three reasons. I'm a writer and that's what we do. We write about our
Oh
lives,
yeah.
trying to make sense of it. I knew in
Yeah.
rehab, this when I started having my experiences, I said, I'm going to write about this. I felt like there was a gap in the recovery literature of the high functioning alcoholic like I was, and
Oh yeah.
also, marriages where people stay together and work through it. So I
Hmm.
felt like, I'm not unique. If we learn anything in the program, it's that none of us is unique, right? We're not terminally unique. And I knew there were other women out there who drank like me, still
Hmm.
looking great on paper, who maybe could benefit from my story, that you don't have to
Yeah.
go take the elevator all the way down to the basement to claim your chair in AA. So if I could help one woman not stay as sick as long as I did, and
Yeah.
I thought it would be worthwhile. I felt like it needed to be out there in the literature. And the other one was, again, we heard that a lot of marriages end because of addiction, even when the
Hmm.
alcoholic gets sober. That, the book is not a self-help book, but I feel like sort of embedded in the narrative is a roadmap of the kind of work you have to do and the kind of commitment you have to do to get over all the pain and anger that my addiction caused and come over on the other side, whole and healed, and that there is a way, there's hope that relationships can be salvaged. My relationship with my son now is amazing. I've been able to sit
Oh,
down across from him and we can talk about the pain I caused him.
yeah.
He didn't drink his whole first year of college because of seeing me, act like an
Yeah. He was
idiot.
afraid.
Yeah, and he had anxiety issues, but there's been a deliverance and a forgiveness from both of them, the two most
Hmm.
important people in my life. And that's priceless.
Yeah.
There's not an ocean of alcohol that's worth what I've got, these healed relationships. And it's just I just thank God that, and I know a lot of people, they never get it, and I don't know why. I'm thankful that I was able to make that switch and, step off that cliff into the abyss. So
I'm telling you, healed relationships. I mean, a peaceful, loving relationship with your family.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's the gold standard. That's what we want, a loving, peaceful relationship.
exactly.
Your best friend.
Best friend. Well, and it's funny. I tell people that my life probably looks pretty boring from the outside today. I write, I work out, I go to meetings, but I love my boring little life. I have so much pleasure. That first cup of coffee in the morning, or a new copy of the New Yorkers in my mailbox. I'm happy as a pig in shit. It's like these little things that make you happier.
Yeah.
And like, who knew?
Yeah. Who knew?
Who
Yeah.
knew?
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
I
Well,
also pet
listen,
my dogs. We have three dogs, so.
what kind of dogs do you have?
Three street rescues, a huge
Oh,
one, a
that's right.
medium
You
one, and a
told
little
me.
one, yeah. And a
Small,
very
medium,
fast
large.
cat.
Poor kitty.
I know.
Man, there's something. I mean, listen, that is a full life when you can really appreciate, be grateful for what you have. It's not getting what you want, it's wanting what you have,
Exactly.
right? And
Exactly.
if this way of life allows us to want what we have and be
Yeah.
happy, and it's enough.
It's
It's
enough.
enough.
And Arlene, I feel like I wish that everybody would have a 12-step program, non-alcoholics. This is
Me
such a
too.
life-changing program, and there's so much anger and hate in the world right now.
Oh
I think
man.
I mean, I just feel like, I would hear people in meetings saying, I'm grateful to be an alcoholic. I was like, oh, bull,
I
I
know, some
truly am
bullshit.
grateful.
Yeah.
If I didn't have this disease, I'd never have the life I had today. And I wish everybody could work the steps or whatever they want to do to have these rejuvenated lives. I mean, I am grateful. I'm very lucky. I'm
Yeah,
very lucky.
it's an amazing
It
experience.
is.
I'm with you. I'm such a 12-step advocate, and I recognize that it's not the only way. But
Right.
man, if people could just, read my book. And there is a way to go through it to stay, for women especially, we need to stay safe. Women's meetings are great and they're
Yeah,
speaker meetings, so you don't have to talk or you go to teeny tiny meetings. I love that you said that you went to literature meetings.
yeah.
There's just, if you have some boundaries and some guidelines, you
Mhm,
can extract these
mhm.
amazing experiences
Yeah.
that enrich our lives in
Mhm.
ways that can't really be described. They have to be experienced.
Exactly. That's the name of the game. You've got to
And it's
experience it to
free.
believe it. It's free. It's a
It's
dollar if
free.
you have one. If you don't have a dollar, it
If you
doesn't
don't have one,
matter.
don't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Funny. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing your experience of, what it was like and how you got sober. I try to be agnostic, recovery agnostic, as much as possible, but it is so refreshing to be
Mhm.
able to talk about this and just be like, yeah, it's an amazing program and it can
Yeah.
help you and it's free and
Yeah.
you'll have all these amazing experiences and your life will be
Yeah.
better.
And what I always say is, what I have now is I'm living an authentic life in that my
Yeah.
insides match my outsides.
Yeah.
And I went through life with this mask of fear. I couldn't take my mask down and you'd
Yeah.
run away screaming. And now
Yeah.
I kind of get to be who I am.
Yeah.
And that sounds so small, but it's really huge. It's a
It's
huge
huge.
thing. It is. I'm
The
just so
world does
thankful.
not value what's really important,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
then when you get sober and you start leading a spiritual life, you
Mhm.
start experiencing what is really important
Yeah.
and being yourself and not having to be fake. Listen, I'm 56. I'm too damn tired to try to make anybody else sound me. I'm too tired.
I love it. There's not that much time left,
I
right?
know, fuck it, just be you.
That's
Well,
great.
Melissa, it was such a pleasure to spend some
Oh,
time with you
thank
today. Thank you
you.
from the bottom of my heart for sharing your story with me.
Well, I hope I did okay. There's a
It's
fear.
amazing.
Oh,
No,
good.
no.
Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed this and what a great opportunity. Thank you. Thank you so much.